Hello and welcome to the second lesson of the Tunisian Crochet Masterclass. If this is your first time, thank you very much for stopping by. My name is Mirka and I make stitch, pattern, crochet and Tunisian crochet tutorials. So if this is of your interest, please consider subscribing. And without further ado, let's dive in. Today we will talk about how to choose yarn for your Tunisian crochet project, how to match the yarn weight with the crochet hook. We will look at how to start your project, different ways how you can start your project. We'll also look at the 4 basic Tunisian crochet stitches, which is Tunisian Simple, Purl, Knit and Reverse Stitch. When it comes to yarn, pretty much any yarn is good for Tunisian crochet, starting with the lace weight all the way up to those bulky and super jumbo chunky yarns. The thing you need to consider is that for Tunisian crochet you need to go several sizes up on your size of your Tunisian crochet hook. So for example, here I have Simply Chunky, paint box Simply Chunky, and the recommended hook size for this yarn is 6mm. However, I'm going to be using 8mm hook. So the recommendation is to go at least 2 sizes up, but once you start a crochet with the hook, you will see whether that's the type of fabric with the drape that you're hoping to go for. So you can go either up or slightly down, although if you select the hook size which is too small for your yarn, it will be quite difficult to make your stitches, and the curl is extra bad with small hook size. So talking about curl, what is curl? So because of the way the Tunisian crochet stitches are formed, the fabric tends to curl with some stitches. The culprits are Tunisian Simple stitch, Tunisian knit stitch and some other combinations. There are several ways how to combat this, and this is beyond the basic Tunisian crochet video. So I'm going to link a video and how to make your edges nice and straight. I'm going to link the video down in the description box. So enough talking, let's get hooking. So let's start our project. So you would start your project usually with a slip knot. So slip knot is a very easy way how to start your project. Like so, you create a loop and you decrease the loop, the diameter of the loop with your long end or long tail of your yarn. So that's the yarn which is connected to your yarn ball. You place the hook on your crochet hook and you start chaining. So this is the first way how you can start your project. You can use chains, you can also use foundation stitches, and you can use crochet foundation cord. So I also created a video on these 3 techniques, how to start your projects in the row, that are made in the row or made flat. So I'm also going to link that video down in the description box for you. So we are now going to start the project with chains. So you will yarn over the hook and pull through the loop on the hook. It's chain 1, yarn over, pull through, that's chain 2, and we will continue like this for desired number of chains which corresponds to stitches. So if you need to make, or if you need 10 stitches for your project, you would chain 10. If it's 30 that you go for, then you need 30 chains. A word of caution when you are making chains. Chains tend to stretch, so I wouldn't recommend to measure the width of your project based on chains, because once you start stitching, once you start creating stitches, the project tends to pull in, so it's not good a way to estimate the width of your project just based on the number of your chains. That's why it's a good idea to swatch first before you start your project. So I've got 10 chains. I'm going to add 2 more. Once we've got a number of chains that we need for our project, you've got several options. You can then start working into the top loop, bottom loop, or the back bump of your chain stitches. So for Tunisian crochet, the general consensus of the people who love Tunisian crochet is to work into your back bumps. However, it's not hard and fast rule, so you can choose what you like. Just for the beginners, let's go to do the stitches through the back bump. So you would insert hook from front to back under the back bump, yarn over and pull up a loop. As you can see, for each chain you add 1 loop on your hook. So adding your loops on the hook is called forward pass. So as you know, Tunisian crochet, or you might not know, but I'm going to explain to you. Tunisian crochet is worked in 2 steps. So the first step is to add the stitches or the loops on your hook. So that's what you do when you work your forward pass. And then you work your return pass. As you can guess, you work your stitches off the hook. So you will end up with 1 loop on your hook. So we are going to continue working into our chain stitches. Like so. Once you get to the last one, we just double check the number of our loops: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, I started with 12 chains. I've got 12 stitches, so I haven't missed. So now we are going to work return pass. For majority of your projects, I would say 95% of your Tunisian crochet projects, you will work the standard return pass. In the remaining 5%, it's when it mostly comes to lace, it will work slightly different return pass. But again, this is beginner's video, so this is beyond the video, beyond the tutorial today. So how to work standard return pass is to yarn over and pull through 1. This is also known as chain 1. And then yarn over, pull through 2. And you will repeat yarn over, pull through 2 all the way to the beginning of your row. So as you can see, we are working those stitches of the hook. Because we yarn over, we add stitch and pull through 2, we always only work 1 stitch off, even though we might pull through 2 loops, but because we yarn over, this would be increase, pull through 2, decrease of 1 stitch. Now we are getting to the end. We do the last yarn over, pull through 2. As you can see, we end up with 1 loop on the hook. This loop is the first stitch of the next row. So this is the right edge stitch of the next row. With this edge stitch, what we need to be careful about, not to let the yarn too loose on this stitch. So we are trying to work it quite tight, because as you start working the first stitches of your row, it will naturally loosen. So just to keep your edge nice and neat, always try to pull on that stitch to keep it nice and tight. There's a big chance that the stitches that you've seen in Tunisian crochet, and why you became interested in Tunisian crochet, is because you somewhere somehow saw Tunisian Simple stitch, which is one of the most beautiful and the easiest Tunisian crochet stitches, and there are countless color combinations that you can create only ever using Tunisian Simple stitch. So what do we do and how do we work Tunisian Simple stitch? So we are going to be working under the front vertical bar. Okay, so you are going to insert your hook from right to left under the front vertical bar, yarn over and pull up a loop, and just your first Tunisian Simple stitch. Simple, right? So we are going to work another Tunisian simple stitch, and we will keep on repeating, working under the front vertical bar all the way to the very last stitch, which is called the end stitch or the left edge stitch. And we are going to do something slightly different. So as you can see, there are two strands of yarn, one on the left and one on the right, and then there is another strand down here. So we are going to ignore this one, and we will work under the left and right strands of yarn. We yarn over and pull up a loop, and again this is to create a neat edge, which closely or not so close, you can judge that matches the beginning of your project or the right edge. Okay, so this was our forward return of forward pass, and we worked Tunisian simple stitch, and now we continue with return pass of chain 1, and then we yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and we keep on repeating this all the way through across the row to the beginning. Okay, so we are going to work a couple of more rows of Tunisian simple stitch, and then we will learn the next Tunisian purl stitch. So I'm going to work this at the speed, and I'll meet you after a few rows. Welcome back. So I worked 4 rows of Tunisian simple stitch all together, and as you can see, this bottom edge starts to curl in. So this is the curl that I mentioned at the beginning. And again, just to remind you, I will link video about how to get rid of the curl and how to treat it in the description below. So the next stitch, Tunisian crochet stitch that you will come across, or that you probably have seen, is Tunisian purl stitch. So how we work Tunisian purl stitch, usually we keep our yarn behind the work. In this case, we are going to bring the yarn forward, so it will be in front of the hook. We insert the hook as if for Tunisian simple stitch, so we are inserting the hook from right to left under the front vertical bar. We yarn over and pull up a loop. As you can see, there is the little bump that reminds the purl stitch in knitting. Perhaps that's why I got named Tunisian purl stitch. Okay, so again, we bring the yarn forward to keep it in front of the hook. We insert the hook from right to left under the front vertical bar. We yarn over and pull up a loop. Okay, and we keep on repeating this for the rest of the row. So what you might notice is that although we worked foundation row and then 4 rows of Tunisian simple stitch, you can actually only see, this would be the foundation row. You can now only see 3 rows of Tunisian simple stitch. So what happened? Where has that one row gone? And this is again because of the way the stitches are made, that the last row basically turns into the row of the stitches which you are currently working. So this is something to bear in mind when you are counting your rows. So that's why it might be sometimes tricky to count your rows, and you find that perhaps you missed a row. This is actually not true. This is because the consecutive row makes the row below looks like the stitches that you are actually making. So the better way to count your rows is by these side chains or the side loops. So as you know, we worked 1 foundation row, this would be this loop, then 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of Tunisian simple stitch, and now we are working 1 row of Tunisian purl stitch. So the best way to count your rows is according to the side chains or the side stitches, the first stitches of the row. So I'm going to continue with my row of Tunisian purl stitches. And again, once we get to the end, to the last stitch, we work the end stitch under both bars of the last stitch and working our standard return pass. Sorry about the tapping, that's the end of my hook, making all that noise. Right. So this was the row of Tunisian purl stitches. Again, I'm going to work a few more rows, meet you at the end for the next stitch. The next basic stitch that we are going to be working is the Tunisian knit stitch. Again, the Tunisian knit stitch reminds many people the knitting stockinette stitch or the knit stitch in knitting, and that's where the name came from. Okay, so the first 2 stitches, Tunisian simple and Tunisian purl, we worked into the front vertical bar. With Tunisian knit stitch, we are going to be working between the front and the back vertical bars. So we are going to insert our hook from front to back, yarn over and pull up a loop. Again, we've got the front vertical bar, the back vertical bar, and we are placing the stitches between these. Not to mistakenly work the stitch between the adjacent stitches. We're going to work the stitch between these 2 bars of the same stitch. Okay, so Tunisian knit stitch is again one of those stitches that curls a lot, and the fabric it creates is quite thick and dense. So if you would like a lighter fabric, you can increase the hook size And again, the stitch for this stitch we also work the standard return pass. So you can see here on the first row of the Tunisian knit stitch, it does look quite like the knit stitch in knitting. As you can see, it has got this ridge and valley, and that's why the fabric created using the Tunisian knit stitch is thick. So again, I'm going to work a few more rows for you to see the pattern of the Tunisian knit stitch, and I'll meet you back for the last stitch of the second part of the Tunisian Crochet Masterclass. The last stitch for today is the Tunisian reverse stitch. So we work the Tunisian reverse stitch into the back vertical bar from the back. So we are not going to go into the stitch from the front, but we are going into the stitch from the back. So the first Tunisian reverse stitch in your row is usually a bit tricky because the bar is just right there. As you can see, here is the bar. We yarn over and pull up a loop. Again, we find the back vertical bar, insert the hook from right to left, yarn over and pull up a loop. And we continue working into each back vertical bars of the row. So what it does, it brings forward these bumps at the front, and some crocheters prefer to, when they make a combination of stitches with Tunisian Simple or Tunisian Knit, they actually prefer to combine these with Tunisian reverse stitch rather than Tunisian Purl stitch. So you've got options there. Again, for this stitch we work standard return pass, so by now you are expert on standard return pass, working this little swatch of the basic stitches. So I'm going to work 3 more rows of Tunisian reverse stitch, and then I'll meet you back for our bind off. Welcome back. So this is our little swatch. We started with Tunisian Simple stitch. We worked 4 rows of Tunisian Purl stitch after that, 4 rows of Tunisian knit stitch, and we ended up with 4 rows of Tunisian reverse stitch. So these are the basic 4 stitches that we've learned today, and now we are going to learn how to bind off your project. So the easiest way how to do the bind off is Tunisian Simple stitch bind off. So what we do is we work the first stitch as if we are going to do Tunisian Simple stitch, and then we pull through the loop which is already on the hook. so we end up with one loop on the hook. We continue working Tunisian simple stitches with pulling through the loop which is already on the hook at the end. And this is a nice way how to bind off your project, and in most cases this will be enough. Okay, so as you can see, working the stitches of this way creates a really neat edge at the top that matches the edge at the bottom, so they both look like row of chains. But what you might have noticed is that while the last pattern was Tunisian reverse stitch, now it looks like we have a extra row of Tunisian simple stitch at the end. Sometimes that's not an issue, in some cases it is, because in some cases they kind of like disrupts the overall stitch pattern that you are creating. So an alternative to this is to work your bind off row in stitch pattern. So for my little swatch, my stitch pattern at the end was a Tunisian reverse stitch. So I'm going to work Tunisian reverse stitch and bind off the stitch by pulling through the loop on the hook. And I continue doing that for every stitch in the last row. And we will see that the results are quite different, and then you can make the decision as to which method you prefer. Okay, now, so as you can see, the last row looks like a row of Tunisian reverse stitch, followed by that nice neat edge, or as if it was made of row of chains. So the only thing that you need to think about with this method is that if you work in certain pattern, for example here we worked 4 rows of each stitch, now you've got an extra row of Tunisian reverse stitch there. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. So if you would like to bind off its in stitch pattern, consider that you will have an extra row of your stitch pattern at the end of the project. Okay, so this might be beyond beginners, but just something to consider when you are making your own patterns or adjusting pattern that you find to what suits your needs. Thank you very much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end of the video. I hope you find the information that I shared with you and tips and tricks in this masterclass useful. Please let me know in the comments below. Do you know how to make all of these stitches? Have you ever considered using the stitch pattern, bind off? What projects are you planning to make? Or let me know what content you would like to see. I'm interested whether you prefer more of pattern tutorials where I explain step by step how to make my patterns for my blog, or you prefer more stitch tutorials, or bit of both. Let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.